and I still don't understand a lot of it, but I'm working on it.
Okay, so going from bar to an office as a psychologist, not that big a difference, right? In the
Not that big a
problems
difference.
that you see. Now you told me, I think just before Gatekeeper was published, you told me you thought it was your best book so far. And every page I read in Gatekeeper, I go, fuck, that's me. That's me. I made all those mistakes. I've done all of those things. You talk so much about if we grow up with chaos, and I'm the eternal optimist. I say, oh, I see these good traits in them, and I just know with just the right love and support, and clean up their messes behind them, they will evolve into this great person that they could be.
Hey,
And
you want to hear about my hole in the wall? I don't
how'd you
remember
get a
what.
hole in the wall? You got a hole in the wall?
This is at my old house. I don't know what I was so pissed about, but it had something to do with her. And I threw something at the drywall, and I'm a little handy. I had it patched before she ever got back. Patched and painted, patched, textured, and painted before she ever got back.
It's time to introduce our special guest to kick off or to continue our Integration Nation interview series. And, when we started building Integration Nation and talking about all the things we could do on these calls, one of them is just the interviews that we could have. And we've been thinking about that for a while. And a chant started to go up. Sean T. Smith, Sean T. Smith. Sean, I like embarrassing. He blushes a little bit. So, we've been wanting to have Sean on here since the very beginning of this. And Sean, welcome. Glad you're here.
Well, thanks for having me, Robert, and happy anniversary to you and the radiant Lupita, who's just a darling. And thanks for having me here. Whenever I'm invited into a space with purposeful men, I try to treat it with the gravity that it deserves. So hope we do okay today.
We'll do fine. Sean and I bumped into each other. Life's interesting. We both were invited to a conference back in Orlando, Florida. He's been a regular there. It was my first time there. And somehow we just kind of happened to cross paths there at the conference. He was a speaker. I was a speaker. We went out and had dinner together just by chance and just hit it off. And so we stayed connected, and I was passing through Denver, Colorado about a couple of years ago. I bought a car in Illinois, and Lupita and I stopped, spent the night at his house with his family, his wife, his daughter, his dog. Lupita and I were trying to remember his dog's name. We couldn't think of it.
Fonzie.
All right. So, and Sean and I, we get on Zoom every month, every couple of months, and we just chat. And, it's always so enlightening because he's just a font of wisdom, and he lets me talk a lot too. So I kind of like that. He's a good listener. So let me read his bio. Let me see. Sean T. Smith is a licensed psychologist in Denver, Colorado. He's the author of The Tactical Guide to Women and Gatekeeper, The Tactical Guide to Commitment. Okay. You're a psychologist. You've written a book, I think A Tactical Guide to Men as well, haven't you? And you have a book for women out there?
I wrote a book called The Practical Guide to Men.
The Practical Guide to Men. Okay.
Yeah, because my sense was that men need to be a little more strategic in their thinking about women, and women probably need to be a little more practical in their thinking about men.
How'd that work? Did you get women to be more practical?
The book sells. Women seem to like it. So
yeah.
Well, and it's been so long ago. I don't remember much about it actually.
All right. So tell us one thing that's not in your bio. All right, you're a psychologist, you've written books. One thing that's not in your bio that makes you uniquely qualified to give men advice about women and relationship.
That's a tough one. Because, well, first of all, I don't know. Do I give advice, or do I just kind of reflect back what I see? I like to think that I'm not giving advice. I like to think that I'm just reflecting back what I see in my clinic. But one thing that makes me uniquely qualified to do that, I don't know if there's anything that makes me uniquely qualified other than I've been watching this stuff since I was a kid. Literally, I grew up in my father's bar, and that's what got me thinking about men and women, is just watching these adults around me with their adult dramas. And and I didn't understand any of it. And I still don't understand a lot of it, but I'm working on it.
Okay, so going from bar to an office as a psychologist, not that big a difference, right? In the
Not that big a
problems
difference.
that you see. Now you told me, I think just before Gatekeeper was published, you told me you thought it was your best book so far. What about what about the book itself makes you think it's your best book?
It was the hardest book to write. Yes, I like it. Okay, I'm proud of it. I don't, if you can look at something that you've written or created and not feel a sick feeling in the pit of your stomach, at least for me, that's usually a good sign, because you see all the flaws in what you create, and I see all the flaws that I created in this book. But it was a hard book to write. I had to bring in a lot of concepts that are, they're heavy concepts. They're not particularly complicated, but they take a little bit of exploration, like the way we relate to other people as human beings, and some behavioral principles, and even a little bit of not statistical knowledge, but how to think about relationships in a more scientific way than we usually think about. And to put that all together into a framework that I think was relatively simple, it was a challenge. It took me a couple years to really get it nailed down, and then maybe another year to write it. So yeah, it was a hard book. It's also, I think, a harder book to read than the Tactical Guide to Women. It takes a little more work.
I'll agree with you on that one. I've got my Sean T. Smith autographed copy. Thank you for that, by the way. And I read it on my Kindle. And I read often, in bed at night, before falling asleep. And I've been reading Gatekeeper, and I like it a lot. And it's hard. It's hard, and it's not hard reading. It's hard for me to read because I hear from men all the time about No More Mr. Nice Guy. Robert, you've been following me around. You've got me on video camera. I'm going to sue you for invasion of privacy. How do you know me so well? And every page I read in Gatekeeper, I go, fuck, that's me. That's me. I made all those mistakes. I've done all of those things. You talk so much about if we grow up with chaos, we're going to invite it into our life. It's going to feel normal. I've been preaching that for years. Whatever we experience, the relationship tools we developed as children to deal with our situations as dependent, needy little children with our caregivers, our parents, our siblings, whatever those tools were, we're going to carry them in adulthood, and we're going to co-create systems with people to let us use those tools. Because if we don't need those tools, we don't know how to be in a relationship. I know intellectually, and I've worked with thousands of couples and thousands of men. Man, it's hard for me to read because it is so much me and all the mistakes that I made. So thank you for that. Thank you for writing a book that is so clear that if you've been down that road, you can't miss it. And if you haven't been down that road, maybe guys won't even know what you're talking about. But hopefully, I know you used to do a podcast that you had me on one time called Before the Train Wreck. And I like that you tend to write preemptively, helping people maybe learn from others and avoid mistakes before they become too big of mistakes. I really appreciate that about you. So I just want to say your book has caused me a lot of pain and discomfort because it is so spot on to, how I grew up and created relationships, especially as a rescuer. And as I did post, and you mentioned, today is Lupita and my 7th anniversary. It's the card she gave me this morning. And in spite of my worst tendencies and programming from childhood, I'm really happy with this woman. I'm really happy with how the marriage has evolved. But it's been a lot of work because we both have had to work on all that baggage we brought. I've been working on mine, in previous relationships as well. And she's an emotionally resilient person. But so the good news is, even though this is painful, there's hope. And your book's very hopeful. Hey, I'm Dr. Robert Glover. In case we haven't previously crossed paths, I'm the author of No More Mr. Nice Guy and the founder of Integration Nation, a worldwide community for men. I hope you're enjoying this clip from a recent live Integration Nation call. If so, I encourage you to check out the Integration Nation YouTube channel, where you'll find tons of videos, including lessons I teach and interviews I do on these weekly calls. I also publish YouTube Shorts, all raw and uncensored. After you've poked around our YouTube channel, go check out Integration Nation at integrationnation.net. With that, I'm in. Back to the video.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of my own mistakes in there too. I didn't identify anybody in the book, and I didn't really identify myself when I was writing about myself. But I'll just say that I wrote from experience on some of the mistakes to avoid. And talking about growing up in chaos, isn't it funny how you grow up in chaos, or you grow up in on the receiving end of mistreatment or whatever it is that did not go well among the adults around you in your direction, that if you're not careful, you fall on either side of that. You become the one who seeks out chaos, or you become the one who creates chaos. You identify with either side of that equation. Same thing with mistreatment and abuse. You can become the one that seeks it out, not intentionally necessarily. If somebody asks you, are you looking to be mistreated? You would say no, but find ways of recreating it. Or you can be the one who goes out and gets kind of scrappy with people, or you identify with the aggressor. But it's important to know which side of the equation you're falling on, I guess.
It could. That's just self-awareness, right? I don't think I started getting much self-awareness until I was in my 30s, when my second wife said, "You're not such a nice guy. Everybody thinks you're a nice guy, but you don't treat me well." And I'd picked a woman that was as burdened with problems as anybody you could imagine, and I was using my superpower. I can talk women down, through, over, get them back to good, and I'm the eternal optimist. I say, oh, I see these good traits in them, and I just know with just the right love and support, and clean up their messes behind them, they will evolve into this great person that they could be. And I don't know about your experience, but my experience is usually what happens is all those things I love about them keep shrinking over time, and all the things I don't like keep expanding over time. And that's just, and I think that you write a lot about that really in the book, that, if the woman has these problems and difficulties, like before you move in with her, before you, knock her up, before you decide to marry her, they're not going to get better just because you move in together, or get married or have a baby.
No. And that's such a classic guy mistake, is to think, well, if things aren't going well, I'm just going to try harder. I'm going to hit it with a bigger hammer. So if the relationship is struggling, I can fix it by moving in. I can fix it by getting a dog with her. I can fix it by signing a lease or whatever. And it's classic guy thinking. It's not bad, it's not wrong, but it doesn't work when you're starting off with a pretty shaky foundation.
Yeah, and that I just love that. That is the thesis of the book. I want to ask you, I want to ask them 1 minute questions, right? Just to kind of do a little popcorn here. I got a 1 minute timer. When we have some members come on for Q&A, we're going to put them on the timer as well. We're going to start at 4 minute, then 3 minute, then 2, and maybe then get some more 1 minute questions at the end. So I wrote down some terms and some quotes from Gatekeeper, and I'll ask you the question or say the term. You got 1 minute to either define it or describe it, and no pressure here. So as soon as I ask the question, I'll hit the clock, and the timer is going to come up on my screen that you get to watch. You don't have to time it. You'll see it. Yeah. Okay. It'll be backwards to me, but you'll see it. Okay. What are entanglements?
Entanglements are commitments to a relationship that make it difficult to leave. So signing a lease with somebody, getting a puppy with somebody, anything that makes it difficult to exit the relationship once you discover that she is not the woman of your dreams.
Damn, that was good. That's just like that was under 40. The timer. Yeah. Okay. What is prestige for a man?
I would say, I forgot what I said in the book. It's your standing in the community. It's your standing among other men and women. When you walk into the room, are you recognized as somebody who has an effect on the world?
Your effect on the world that gives you prestige. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just leave the clock going. What are standards?
Oh, that's a tougher one. Standards are well, no, it's not. It's not tough. It's your expectations for her and for the relationship. It's knowing what you will tolerate and what you will not tolerate. And guys get very fuzzy about what they will tolerate, particularly if the pussy's good.
Particularly, or if we think it's going to be good. If we think it's going to be good.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, let's start the timer over again. Define composure.
Oh dang it! I
this requires composure, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I did define it in the book. It's the ability to maintain your calm demeanor in the face of disruptions and threats and discombobulations.
She's waving a knife at you, a hatchet, throwing things at you, calling you every name in the book, and then you say, I'm out of here. And then she gets even worse with the names, and she lays down in front of you, blocks the door, lays down in front of the tires on your car.
Yeah. If she can get you to fight with her, then you're not composed.
You're not composed.
I speak from experience. I've had my moments where I wasn't composed.
I think we all have. I'm going to guess we've all had those moments where we weren't composed. I know I certainly have. There's some holes in the wall. My house is built out of concrete, and there's some holes right above my bed, the bed that Lupita and I share. Those holes are in the wall because I threw a Kindle at it. This has been about 4 or 5 years ago. In just a moment of non-composure, I threw it at the wall. It blew up and made a lot of sparks. It looked really cool. It looked so cool. I threw it again, and it made more sparks. I threw it a third time, and it didn't make any sparks the third time. And,
hey, you want to hear about my hole in the wall?
How'd you get a hole in the wall? You got a hole in the wall?
This is at my old house. I don't know what I was so pissed about, but it had something to do with her. And I threw something at the drywall, and I'm a little handy. I had it patched before she ever got back. Patched and painted, patched, textured, and painted before she ever got back. So she never knew I lost my composure that time.
That would be a great title of a book: Patched, Textured, and Painted. Yeah. And you know, Jackson Browne, that made me think Jackson Browne's got an amazing song. I think it's called, it's a hole in the wall. It's either hole in the wall or it's about a locket that was dropped in that hole in the wall. It was just a symbol of their fighting. And I've left those holes there. I didn't patch them. I wanted the reminder with no shame, no toxic shame about it. I wanted the reminder. I lost my composure, and I wanted the reminders to that's not the way I want to go. It's not the way I want to operate in the world. And just to show, going back to, you know, one reason I've stuck around with this woman, there's a lot of reasons, but she got up, we're both sitting on the bed, and I just had gotten triggered by something that she, just really a facial expression and a reaction she had to me. She didn't really even do anything. And she got up, left, drove away. I got up, pulled the sheets off the bed, cleaned everything up, swept everything up, threw everything away in the trash, put new sheets on the bed, made it. I didn't know she was coming back. And she came back a little bit later on that evening. I think I was downstairs, and she went upstairs, and she took her Kindle reader, and put it on my nightstand. Oh. Put it there for me. And I felt so loved that, you know, she saw the worst of me, and she offered a gift to me. And I get teary-eyed telling that. Yeah, and I handed it back to her, and I said, no. I said, my consequence is I don't get to use a Kindle reader until I'm going to wait a few months. That's the consequence. I want to remember the consequences of my actions. And so I felt touched by that as well. So composure. All right. So a couple more 1 minute pieces here. What is opportunity cost?
That's what you could be doing instead of what you're doing right now. So
say more. Give an illustration.
You're in a relationship with a woman who is not treating you well, and maybe she's a good person, just your values are mismatched, incompatible. That happens too. The time that you spend in that relationship is time that you're not cultivating a relationship that would fit both you and her and the new person in a new way, in a better way.
In a better way. Okay. Yeah. Wasted time.
Wasted time.
All right.
Wasted time and wasted practice. You know, because you're practicing a skill that is useless. You're practicing being with somebody you're incompatible with.
Say more about that. That's really brilliant, actually. Wasted
that's a real,
because you're practicing skills that aren't going to serve you in the rest of your life.
Yeah. And that's the real opportunity cost, that if I'm practicing keeping things under control in this chaotic relationship, or compromising, in the worst sense of the word, my values, while she compromises her values. And these are skills that you practice, like playing tennis or playing the piano, but they're not skills that will really benefit you in a healthy relationship,
Yeah.
because you just won't need them in a healthy relationship.
Yeah. You know, I hired a meditation coach this week because, you know, I've always wanted to meditate. You know, like a lot of people, I've tried. You know, my mind doesn't shut up like most people, and I'm thinking, you know, and so I don't do it much, but I know it would probably be good for me. So
Mhm.
I hired a meditation coach to help me just get into the habit of meditating. And you know, and they call it a practice of meditation because you have to practice it. It doesn't come easy. And you know, in psychological, neurological terms, neurons that fire together wire together. And the
Mhm.
more we repeat any kind of behavior, increases the likelihood that that behavior is going to be a constant in our life. And so, yeah, if we're practicing those skill sets that don't really serve us, that's just, we're going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Here's, this may take more than a minute, but because you talk about this quite a bit in the book. What are organizing principles?
Organizing principles. I try to stay away from jargon, but this was an important piece of jargon that I thought, and I wrestled with this for about a year. Is there a better term than this to use? It's a kind of an archaic term in psychology. It goes back to some old psychologists that aren't with us anymore. And it really is a shorthand for the way you relate to other people, but more than that, it's how you view yourself in relation to other people, which dictates the kind of relationships that you're going to create. So
Repeat
you
that
view
again.
your
Repeat that because that's crucial. How you view yourself.
in relation to other people.
Okay.
So it's not people talk about core beliefs. I thought about using that term in this book, but core belief is really just something I believe about myself, or something I believe about the world, or something about other people. An organizing principle is how I view myself in relation to others, and
Right.
that's what I will go out and create.
Oh,
So
man,
for example, if I can
one
give you a
minute.
quick
Keep
example,
going. No, keep
if
going.
i
Yeah.
if i view my this will be quick, if I view myself as the outsider, then I'm going to act like the outsider, and people are going to respond to me as if I'm the outsider, because that's what I'm telling them to do.
Yeah. And there's so many examples we could give.
Yeah.
And a good chunk of the book is examples of men's organizing principles and how they show up in relationship. And yeah, you know, we do, I've always said we train people how to treat us. And we're going to train them to treat us the way that we've been treated. And that's kind of the theme of the book. Our history gets repeated in the present and into the future.
Mhm.
And organizing principles are, and I like that you use kind of a term and pulled it out and gave it your own meaning and brand, because it got my attention, you know, as a therapist. You know, it got my attention because I could kind of guess at what it meant, but it wasn't a term I was used to using either.
Mhm.
So I found it helpful. So, you know, guys, as you're reading the book, it's a good way to look at, you know, what you were trained to believe about yourself, and what you inaccurately internalized as a small child because you didn't know better. And then what you've carried into adulthood, you keep recreating because it feels normal. It's that, again, it's the neurons that fire together or wire together. All right, what's a gatekeeper?
Gatekeeper is the man who protects his future, his children, his family, his future children, his future family, from the from relationships with women of poor character, or good women who just have incompatible values. And I chose that word very specifically because there's uh, this saying, sort of a saying, I don't know what it is. I guess it's a saying in the culture that women are the gatekeepers of sex, men are the gatekeepers of commitment. That's not a perfect saying, but there's some truth to it. And in the introduction, I talk about where that saying came from, or at least where I think it came from. And it came from a researcher back in the 60s named Angus John Bateman, that's the coolest name I've ever heard. But he was looking at fruit flies, and he came with this observation that the lady fruit flies were protecting the sex. And then that idea sort of carried forth in evolutionary psychology. And I'm pretty sure it led to this maxim that we have, that men are the gatekeepers of commitment. Problem is, I'm not seeing a lot of evidence that men out there are behaving like effective gatekeepers. They come at it with desperation, and I'm over my minutes. So I'll stop there.
All right. Well, let me tee something up. I made this observation to you a couple of weeks ago when you and I were talking. I said I'll let it sit with you and see if it how it lands or resonate or not with you. And I said, as I was reading your book, Gatekeeper, and this is a good way to tee it up. You're talking about this evolutionary psychology, and there's a lot of that is kind of the rage nowadays in the manosphere. Men take a lot of they misuse a lot of evolutionary psychology, social biology, and then they make these hard and fast rules about this is how women are. This is how and you and I had conversations about that. But as I was reading your book, because I know some of your background, because I met you at a conference where, for example, Rollo Tomassi was at that conference, and reading the book, it struck me as that it feels like a combination or a cross between Rollo Tomassi's Rational Male and David Data's The Way of the Superior Man. And partly because you do talk about some of that evolutionary psychology and the role that a man has and prestige for a man and getting your man card and things like that, which are kind of, things like talked about in the manosphere. But you also really stress purpose. And David Data does that. The purpose has to come before the relationship dynamic. And he says, no woman will respect. I heard David Data say one time, what woman would respect a man whose greatest purpose is her? And I was like, good. that's a big stick upside the head. And your way of simply putting it is that purpose has to come above romance, and it just has to. So I shared that observation with you. What was your takeaway? You've had a couple of weeks to think about it.
On the comparison between David Data, I don't know enough about David.
I kind of thought maybe the cross, yeah.
I don't. Yeah, it's a complementary comparison. I think one of the big difference between this and Rational Male is, well, first of all, I didn't pull this out of my ass. Like, sorry. No, I'm kidding.
You just had to get that in there.
Yeah, I did. No, I actually like Rollo's book, and I think that guys should read Rollo's book. I also think that guys should. I heard somebody say once, you should read this, and then you should forget most of it. And I think you should read The Rational Male, because there's some realities in there that my profession of psychology will not talk to about, guys. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because we don't know it. We don't want to talk about it, whatever the reason. I think there's some good information in there. Where I think it differs is that Rollo focuses a lot on what he calls female psychology. He talks about hypergamy, goes way out into left field on hypergamy and so forth. But he's focusing on what he considers female psychology. There's virtually nothing in this book that's about female psychology. This book is not about women. It's about men. It's about you, the reader. But ironically, it is about women, because if it wasn't for women, this book wouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't talk about female psychology. I don't know what female psychology is.
Okay, good. Yeah, me neither. Yeah, let's just stick with men. We'll work on that. It's a big enough challenge. So that's a good answer. And I like that little dig you got in there.
Well, he's not here to defend himself, so I shouldn't have done that.
Okay.
I did debate him one time, and he was a good sport about it.
Okay. Did you tell him that he pulled the Rational Male out of his ass?
Did I tell him? I don't think so. That wouldn't have been productive. I was trying to be nice when I debated him.
Okay. You're good.
Polite, man. I should say.
Polite. You're good, man.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to ask you one more question, and it's from the book. And then we're going to turn this over and do a bunch of Q&A. And I'm sure everybody's sitting out there going, Robert, shut up. I want to ask a question. Shut up. I want to ask a question. So we're going to let you ask questions, and we're going to give you guys about a half hour to ask questions. All right. So here's a question. There's a line in the book where you're talking about worry serves a purpose. And I've been reading a couple books lately on worry. I may even confuse a little bit of it, but it gives us some sense of we can create order if we worry. and you give some examples of, basically, without calling it of some OCD type behaviors. And there's a comment that you make in there about obsessively checking locks for the third time. And then you put in parentheses, ask me. And then you actually footnote it, but I haven't gotten actually to the footnotes. I don't know what the footnote says. So what should we ask you about obsessively checking locks 3 times?
The footnote was probably had to do with the way anxiety functions. And what I was talking about in the book is, I'm not OCD, but I do have that tendency to want to check and double check and make sure things are under control. And what I was talking about in that section is that it's part of the function of the mind is, well, it's obviously to keep us safe, but one of the ways it does that is by compelling us to try to manage things. And I'm trying to think what that section of the book was exactly about, the lock checking and so forth. Oh, it had to do with the fact that unproductive behaviors like checking a lock for the 57th time or the 3rd time, it doesn't feel good precisely, but at the same time, there's some circuitry in the brain that gets some relief from it. So it feels bad, but it also feels good at the same time. And this can show up in our relationship behavior too.
Right. Good. Yeah. You said ask me. So like, it was like personal, like I've had some of those tendencies.
Yeah.
Which I thought, well, I haven't been around you long enough or enough times to watch. Do you check locks 3 times? I don't know. Maybe you do. So thanks for answering personal question.
Yeah, certainly.